Every Murdertown is unique, every story terrifying. Tonight, we visit a town with a mysterious secret.
I said, we wanted to know the truth, however bad it would be.
A tale that left a community baffled.
He'd vanished. He'd gone. And nobody knew where he was.
And a killer that hid his crimes from those around him.
And then he just said, there's one more body. And the room just went silent.
Tonight's Murdertown is Portsmouth. Some killers attack complete strangers. Some target the vulnerable, the young, or the elderly. And some prey on people that they know. There are killers who are inspired by money or by revenge, by sexual deviancy, by hatred. There are opportunists and there are meticulous planners. But what unites these men and women is one simple trait, and it's the most terrifying thing of all. They live amongst us. In our towns, on our streets, in our houses. They're just like the rest of us, but capable of evil. And they could be anywhere. Welcome to Murdertown.
Do you feel it in the air? Oh, something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes.
In tonight's episode, we're in Portsmouth. It's a town with a proud history, a coastal town, a home to much of the Royal Navy and a gateway to the seas. But it's also home to one of Britain's forgotten serial killers, a man who could one day be back on the streets. In the 1980s, it was the home port for HMS Illustrious, a ship that was returning home for Christmas. One of the sailors on board was Simon Parks.
Simon was the joker in the class, always was. Lovely sense of humour, very artistic. He loved drawing, probably more than his academic work. Just a happy, homely young man. And of course, it was so many years ago. I mean, things were different then. You know, they could go out to play football in the local field or go out on their bikes, and it was just so much more relaxed for children then.
From an early age, Simon had designs on a life at sea.
He joined the Sea Cadets when he was 12, when he loved it. You know, and I was amazed to see him polishing his boots and ironing his uniform. He decided he'd go into the Navy. I suppose it seemed to be a natural thing. And he actually went to the careers office himself, and that's how it started. Of course, you worry when they leave home for the first time at such a young age, but I felt he was safe. And we missed him terribly because, you know, suddenly he was there and then gone. But we knew he was coming back.
I joined the Navy in 1977, and I did my job training communications in Portsmouth. I've been posted elsewhere, for instance, the Falklands and Hong Kong, but I've always came back to Portsmouth. In 1986, I was posted to HMS Illustrious, and I was pleased to find out that we had a round-the-world trip coming up. So we were all really looking forward to going on that deployment. Simon would have probably just finished his training at the time, joined his new ship, and that's a pretty hairy thing when you join the Navy. You like to fish out of water. And yeah, so he would have joined in, we would get ourselves ready and prepped to go on the world tour.
For 9 months they were at sea, and after surviving the trip, the sailors were on their way home. But there was time for one more stop-off in Gibraltar.
We eventually arrived in Gibraltar, probably around the middle of December, excited because we knew we were on the last leg home. Gibraltar is renowned for being a good run ashore because there's pubs galore. We ended up in the Horseshoe Bar, which was our local. Probably around about 30 of us, I should imagine, because the rest of the guys would have been on board duty, got drunk, come back, went to bed, and got up next day to go to work. And as long as you were okay to go to work, and that was fine. But on the 13th of December, you have a roster call every morning to make sure that everybody's back on board. And then that was the first point it was realised that Simon wasn't on board because he hadn't clocked in. Honestly can't put my finger on the minute where I didn't see Simon there. I do know he'd have gone to another pub and he'd have done exactly the same as what we would have done. We would have got something to eat and went back on board the ship.
Word quickly spread, and the entire company of the ship wondered where Simon might be.
Obviously people were worried because they didn't know where he was, but Gibraltar's only a small place. It's only 4 mile long and 2 mile wide, and it's got a big rock in the middle of it, so it's not as if you can get lost there, sort of thing. And he couldn't get off out of Gibraltar anyway because it's got a border. We just thought he would turn up. We just thought he might end up asleep somewhere and turn up about midday, probably the worst for wear. But once it got to the point where he'd be missing most of the day and he still hadn't turned up on board the ship, then we all started thinking there was something amiss. He's looking forward to going home. So what else could have happened? We just didn't know. He just wasn't there. He'd just gone.
Rookie sailor Simon Parks had apparently vanished. With no sign of where he was, HMS Illustrious returned home to Portsmouth, with one sailor missing from its ranks.
I think it was the 18th of December, 1986, that they were supposed to dock in Portsmouth. We had a phone call saying Simon hadn't returned to the ship. And I remember that I was home on my own. My husband was working. And it was dreadful. Just didn't know what to do. And we were left like that for days, it seemed. Well, it was days, with no contact. Most terrible time in the world. We didn't want to think the worst. And he was so excited about coming home for Christmas. But the assumption in those days, I'm afraid with the Navy generally, was that someone has gone AWOL, that not that necessarily that something's happened to them.
So when I reported back for duty 2 weeks later, still no Simon at all, not to be seen. He'd vanished, he'd gone, and nobody knew where he was.
Simon Parks was officially absent without leave, out of character and unexplained. No leads, no clues, nothing. But Simon wasn't the only Royal Navy sailor to seemingly vanish into thin air. The city of Portsmouth was about to lose another. In 1986, the Navy community in Portsmouth was learning how one of its sailors, Simon Parks, had apparently gone AWOL. He'd not returned to his ship, HMS Illustrious, after shore leave in Gibraltar, and for years there would be no news. The people of Portsmouth and the naval base reluctantly moved on.
Portsmouth is a lovely city. It's got a massive heritage from the Navy. When I first joined, the bars used to be packed full of the lads from the ships.
Crime is probably no different to any other sort of city centre in the country. Back in the day, there used to be quite a lot of assaults, alcohol-related assaults, drugs as any other city centre.
Neil Cunningham spent 21 years working for Hampshire Police, and Portsmouth was one of the places he covered.
I worked in an office with 12 other detectives and dealt with crimes such as serious sexual assaults, serious assaults, murders and such like.
By the late 1990s, Portsmouth had long forgotten about missing sailor Simon Parks. It had been over a decade, and there was a new story breaking. Another sailor, called Nicholas Wright, had gone AWOL after returning to Portsmouth from HMS Birmingham. Nicholas Wright was a rating, one of the junior ranks within the Navy. He was 18 and had not long left home in Leicester to sign up. Now he was missing after a routine night out in one of Portsmouth's many Navy nightclubs.
On the 12th of December 1997, Nicholas had been out, and I'm not quite sure whether he was due to start sort of Christmas shore leave, but he'd been out with a group of friends, and they went to Joanna's nightclub. For years it'd been popular with the Royal Navy at the end of a night out. And then that same night, his friends talked about they may have seen him speaking on the back stairs of Joanna's nightclub to the firefighting instructor they'd previously met on a course. And that was the last time anybody saw of him that evening. He never reappeared. His family reported him missing to the Navy, and he was dealt with as AWOL, which is absent without leave, which in effect is quite a major difference to how you deal with a missing person. But not uncommon to go absent without leave in the Navy. It's not necessarily that they'd always report it to the police even now.
While the Royal Navy recruits young sailors to help protect our shores, they occasionally find a rotten apple in their ranks. David McGreevy was one such man, stationed in Portsmouth on HMS Eagle. His career there turned sour after a court-martial, and later he was discharged. Just 2 years later, McGreevy committed one of the most shocking crimes ever seen, the murder of 3 children, all found impaled on railings in Worcester. Life sentences followed, but his case returned to the public eye in 2019 when he was freed on parole, aged 68. And in 1997, sailor Nicholas Wright had been reported as AWOL, absent without leave, from his posting in the city of Portsmouth. As was often procedure at the time, the absence was dealt with by the Navy, but on this occasion, something happened that would change the investigation. Nicholas's parents reported their son's disappearance to the Hampshire Police. Suddenly, this wasn't just an absent sailor. This was a missing person.
In this particular case, an analyst was brought in to create a timeline of events, sequence of events. So every witness statement is then mapped. Associations made with the statements, the individuals, the locations.
Most crimes are solved in the first few days of an investigation, when fresh evidence can be gathered. But this time, months had gone past, and evidence had been lost.
Evidentially capturing CCTV, where there's a good chance if we'd have been notified within 12, 24 hours, we could have got CCTV. But again, time just waters the evidence that's available. You're constantly inspired by what happened to tell the family what happened. Whether you like it or not, the answer may not be nice, may not be a good answer. The hope is that Nicholas is one of those young people that just ran away, couldn't face it. But the facts and the information available from family and friends, there was no indication of that. There was no precursor event that we could find out, which would be the catalyst to him saying goodbye, disappearing. At this point, obviously, I hope Nicholas was alive. But with the information and evidence available, realistically, that was highly unlikely.
So what had happened? Where had Nicholas gone? Police had to wonder whether he'd had an accident, come to harm of his own accord, or whether he was the victim of foul play. So they went back to basics, going through all the original statements to see if witnesses could remember anything else. And they focused on the statement of Alan Grimson, a fellow sailor who they believed was the last person in the nightclub to see Nicholas on that night.
Grimson's own witness statement said he was there and believes he saw him on the back stairwell, knew of Nicholas as a pupil at one of his firefighting courses. We had no body. We had no other information to suggest Nicholas is alive, so the presumption is that he's dead. So he had some questions to answer.
I knew him as a stoker, engine room, with my husband and MEM. And then he went on to be fire crew and, you know, worked his way up in the Navy. He was a nice person to be around. He was just funny, helpful, just an all-round nice guy.
Kim Kaplan became friends with Alan Grimson through her then boyfriend. In fact, Alan was invited to be best man at their wedding.
We all met up at Portsmouth Registry Office and my parents had come down from Leeds. Alan chatted to everybody, especially my mum. My mum thought he was a lovely chap.
But Alan Grimson had some secrets. One of those that he kept to himself was that he was gay. Homosexuality was forbidden in the UK Navy when Alan first joined, so Alan had decided to keep his sexuality under wraps, playing the role of a straight man and fooling even his closest friends. Alan was given a nickname by fellow sailors based on his unusual appearance. They called him Frankenstein, or Frankie for short. Now, with Alan Grimson being the last person to see sailor Nicholas Wright alive, he was arrested on suspicion of being involved, and he was taken to the police station for questioning.
Alan Grimson is an intimidating-looking character. He was very eloquent. He was a big guy, crew cut, haircut, but he was engaging and keen to help. On day one, I met him 8 o'clock in the morning. One of the opening questions is, Alan, we've not met before. I believe you've served in the Royal Navy for a number of years. Tell me about your service history. So there's no pushing, testing, challenging at this point. This is all about open account, engaging, building rapport. I think he felt in complete control of the interview and just opened up, told us all about his service career. It was like having a chat at work, but it almost felt too good to be true. The fact that he sat there and not once said to us, in interview, outside of interview, hey, come on, you've arrested me on suspicion of murder here. Ask me a question. If you're an innocent man, why are you going to sit there for a whole day and not say, come on, talk to me. It's great talking about my service, but let's get down to the meat and bones. We also arrested his best mate, who was the chief petty officer at the time. His house was searched, his garden was dug up. And the other interview team were getting a lot more, I don't know why I'm here, I don't know what I've done. I haven't done anything. We weren't getting any of that. And more, we felt our suspect, our interview, was going to be the one that was going to take us somewhere. We wanted to leave him with something to think about. He was in the same cell block as his mate. Were there going to be conversations? Alan, what have you done? Why am I here? So that was how we left it at the end of day one.
Alan Grimson had so far revealed nothing, but police hoped a night in the cells might help him to remember something important. But they had no idea he was about to make an incredible confession. When police in Portsmouth had reopened the file on missing sailor Nicholas Wright, they'd gone back to the very beginning.
Nicholas had apparently gone AWOL from the Royal Navy after a night out, and now, 18 months later, detectives were piecing together where he might have gone. To do that, they'd gone back to the original witness statements, and they'd brought in the last person to see Nicholas alive, a fellow sailor called Alan Grimson.
We get to the police station early, and Grimson had spoken to the custody sergeant and told the custody sergeant, "Can you tell the interview teams I want to tell them about the disappearance of Nicholas Wright?" And when we were told that, we went quiet. We thought about the times we'd sat reviewing hours and hours and hours of statements, CCTV, and here he is saying, "I want to tell you." We all had this feeling, collectively, that something had happened and something had gone wrong. An overdose, some sexual assault, and this is an isolated, one-off incident that Nicholas has died. What do I do with the body? So we went to see him in his cell, and he just started talking for hours and hours and hours. Alan started taking us through how he saw Nicholas on the back stairs of the nightclub. Everything was just new information we didn't know. We had assumptions, and we couldn't have been further wrong. He described how they'd been drinking, and he'd known Nicholas for a while, and that seen him in and around the Navy base, seen him in and around the club occasionally, and had offered him a lift before. Nicholas had said no, but Nicholas was really drunk. So he got him back to the flat. They sat on the sofa at the flat. Alan explained that he made advances on him, tried to kiss Nicholas and was pushed back. And it just made him angry, really angry. And this side of his character came out. He'd been hiding his homosexuality within the services for a long time, and then just beat Nicholas. And he got him in the hallway, and he remembers at one point Nicholas was laid on his front and Grimson was on his back. And he had a diver's knife, a really sharp diver's knife. And then with his hand, he started motioning how he cut him and what he did. And then he put him in the bath and went to bed. He talked about that he spent all day with Nicholas in the bath. And what was he going to do with the body? How am I going to get rid of the body? He had a blue Astra on an M plate, I believe. So darkness that evening of the 13th of December. He managed to get the body down the back metal staircase and into the boot of the car. And then he said something which was just very odd. As he pulled out of the back of this service road onto the main road, he saw a policeman. And he stopped and spoke to the policeman. And he was going to tell the policeman, you wouldn't guess what's in the boot of my car. Very odd thing to do. That started us thinking more along the lines of, this isn't just a panicky one-off, you don't know what to do. This is something really cold and calculated.
Detectives now had a confession, and it was enough to charge him. But they wanted to know everything they could about the crime, and there was one vital question that would move the case forward. What had he done with Nicholas's body?
Just to corroborate what Alan had said is so important, that if there's no body, then the evidence is more difficult to prove. And rather than him try to describe it from where we were at Alton Police Station, we drove to Portsmouth, and I said, take me on the route from the flat.
Alan and Neil set off, heading out of Portsmouth to a remote location that Alan said he'd recognise because of a distinctive tree.
So we've been driving in the car for some time now. Alan had been giving us directions as to where to go. Still looking for this tree in this triangular area. And then, still chatty, Alan directed us to park the cars up over on that sort of lay-by gated entrance just to our left. I got out the car, he got out the car, and then there was just an eerie silence. I remember in the car with him many times where I said, look, there's a tree, there's a triangular verge, is that it? And in the end, I said, I'm going to shut up. Because he knew exactly where it was. I think we were all feeling a bit nervous, and Alan pointed from the car over towards this area here. And I remember Alan just walking off in front of me. And we walked almost to the point where we are now. Alan just sort of pointed in there. And he was probably as close as I am. And then he walked off. And I asked him, Alan, what have you pointed at? And he said, that's where the body of Nicholas is. And then one of my colleagues came back, just quietly pulled me to one side, saying, there's a body. There is a good chance that the body of Nicholas would have been uncovered, but nobody walks along this particular area. But the way that the journey came and the way that Alan was directing the journey certainly indicated that when he buried Nicholas here, this wasn't the first time that he'd come here. It was a day that a lot of detectives and police officers never get the opportunity to have. So that feeling is it was of great, great sadness, because, you know, part of you hopes that actually there is going to be some happy ending to this. But as the day went on, the more unravelled, even if it was how we thought it was going to go, it couldn't be more harrowing, more challenging, more difficult. But the next thing was, what do you tell Nicholas's parents, his family, his friends?
After 18 months of wondering where Nicholas could have gone, his family finally had answers. But Neil and his colleagues hadn't finished with their questions for Alan.
We just felt this isn't the whole story. This isn't the whole story. And so we asked the researchers to look at homophobic crimes in Portsmouth and Southsea in Hampshire. Is there some unsolved crimes? You know, there was such violence involved, and him wanting to get this power and control. We just felt there was something else.
Portsmouth is a town which has seen numerous murders over the years, and they continue to occur. In 2018, Victoria Arthur was jailed for a minimum of 23 years following the murder of a 36-year-old woman in the town. She'd attacked the woman over a £100 debt, stabbing her 7 times with one fatal blow to her neck. It was the latest in a long line of devastating crimes. But while most killers thankfully only strike once before they're caught, there are others who do more. Back in 1999, Alan Grimson had just confessed to murder. Police in the town were exploring what else he might have done.
We had one final question to ask him. Are there any other matters that you want to talk to us about? And then he just said, there's one more. And I said, one more what? And he said, there's one more body. And the room just went silent. And then he gave a brief account. And we're mindful of the clock is ticking out here. You know, we've got minutes to go before it's charge and release. And he then told us in brief detail how he had 12 months to the day after Nicholas, the 12th of December 1998, taken a barman home who was very drunk from a pub in Portsmouth and did the same thing to him.
Within a matter of hours, Alan Grimson had gone from being a suspect in the case of a missing sailor to a double killer. Police discovered the second victim was Sean Jenkins. He was 20 years old and had also spent time in the Royal Navy. He'd even once met Alan while serving, but had dropped out of the ranks and was working behind a bar on the 12th of December 1998, when Alan Grimson had called in for a drink. What followed was another horrific, violent crime.
He invited him back to the flat because Alan wanted to get that feeling of power and control again, a feeling that is so difficult to get. And so he took Sean back, and Sean was really drunk. And he basically held him hostage for hours at knife point. With Nicholas, it was quicker because Nicholas pushed his advances away. Sean was more submissive. He assaulted him. Eventually, he put Sean into the bathroom and then bashed him with a baseball bat a number of times.
Police now had two victims, and they'd been killed in almost identical ways. Both were lured into Grimson's home, both attacked, and both of the bodies had been dumped a short distance away. But there was another connection too, because as investigators soon realised, both had been attacked on December the 12th, just a year apart. So was the date significant? And what else had happened on the 12th of December?
There's something not right here. That's when one of the Navy officers who were present during the interviews had a list of those that were absent without leave and saw the name S. Parks on the list, missing 12th of December 1986.
Simon Parks had been listed as AWOL in 1986, whilst on a tour of duty in Gibraltar on HMS Illustrious.
We knew that Alan had had two tours on the Illustrious. One, we believe, was 86.
The first time we heard of Alan Grimson was a telephone call from the Portsmouth police saying they would like to visit. They were linking Alan Grimson with Simon's disappearance. We knew that he'd been accused, or he'd admitted to 2 murders. And it was incredible. You didn't want to hear that sort of news, but there it was, something was happening. However horrible it was, something was happening. All those years that we'd gone, just coping on our own, now suddenly people believed us and believed that something had happened to Simon. I said, we wanted to know the truth, however bad it would be.
Simon's family thought they were going to get answers, but they were to be disappointed.
We thought we had a case, but unfortunately, it didn't happen. Didn't happen. It was circumstantial evidence. There just wasn't enough for the CPS to agree to him being charged and going to court again. He hasn't ever admitted to being involved with Simon, but the evidence is that Alan Grimson and another officer were the last people to be with Simon on that night.
Alan Grimson was charged and convicted of the murder of Nicholas and Sean, and he was given a life sentence. But there was no evidence linking him to Simon's disappearance.
Navy sailor Alan Grimson was a man who had kept a deadly secret. He'd killed 2 men in Portsmouth, and police had learned that both had been slayed on December the 12th, exactly 1 year apart. But that wasn't all. Their inquiries had found another sailor had gone missing a decade earlier, also on December the 12th. Grimson hadn't confessed, but that didn't stop the town wondering just how many crimes he'd committed. And some couldn't believe he'd been capable of murder at all.
Nothing that I ever saw about him would make me think that he committed those crimes. It's almost like we're talking about somebody else. I never found him to be a bully. I never found him to show any type of violence. I can assure you, if you met him like I met him, you'd think, oh, he's going to be a fantastic pal. And I've never got my head round it. Never ever have got my head round how someone can change like that. And I just think, what happened to Alan? The Alan that I know. That's not the Alan I knew.
20 years after Grimson was caught, the town is still desperate for him to give answers on whether he was involved in the murder of missing sailor Simon Parks.
My gut feeling, and in my heart of hearts, I believe Alan Grimson killed Simon. He's still on Gibraltar. He's there somewhere. Cannot think of anything else that would have happened. I mean, he's got a life sentence, but life sentence is not life sentence anymore. Not be there, not be away forever. So I think if he admits to it now, he's going to get another life sentence, isn't he?
Despite repeated appeals from friends and family, Alan Grimson has refused to admit any involvement in Simon's disappearance. There's no evidence connecting him to it, and without something new, he'll never be charged. And Neil doesn't believe that Alan will ever make admissions.
There's two things that I believe have stopped him talking. One was his conviction and his sentence, and I believe he still thought he could get out and live. And the other one being that his mum was still alive. And perhaps it was too much for her. But there's too many coincidences here, and for the parents, it beggars belief that they will never know what happened to Simon. There is only one person who can assist Simon's parents and the police, if it's required, in knowing what happened to Simon.
I've often thought about writing to Alan and what I would say to him. And as many times as I've thought about it, all I've come up with is, why? I feel sad. I feel sad, obviously, for the people who've been killed and obviously for their parents, but I also feel sadness about a man who I knew to be a lovely person turning out like this. There's a sadness there. All I can think to say is, why? Why? You know, what the hell happened for you to end up like this? Who knows? Who knows what he'll say to me? He might not even write back.
Despite not getting a confession, Simon's mum, Margaret, is resigned to knowing her son is unlikely to return home. And she believes Alan is the most likely suspect.
It's better than not knowing. It's given us some closure, but not enough closure. I don't really think of Alan Grimson at all. In fact, I pity him, really. He is nothing to me at all.
I spent a lot of time with Alan in interviews, and he told me in great detail about two. Why wouldn't he tell me about others when there is information available to suggest there are others? And the only rational answer I can give is that there is the potential for a parole board. Any more admissions, I would imagine that Alan would never be released.
You can't fix that. You know, it's like rapists. Rapists should never be back out of the streets again. You can't fix people like that. You can't fix them. Sorry, but you can't.
The whole investigation, his whole behaviours, his whole pattern of offending, I don't think has ever happened in Portsmouth before, or we'll see the likes of that again.
I'm hoping it's a one-off. You know, I'm hoping Portsmouth we'll never have to go through this again. I can't imagine a judge would release a serial killer. Surely these people don't get that back out into the community, do they?
During one of the interviews with Alan in Waterlooville police station, in the days post his confession about Nicholas, he said that if he hadn't have been arrested when he was in the early hours of the 15th of December, there would have been another one. It would be scary to ever feel that Alan Grimson could be walking the streets.
Serial killers in the UK are rare, and serial killers that target specific sections of society are rarer still. But in this town, there was a killer who did just that. And who knows the true figure of how many victims were in his wake? The only thing for certain is that Portsmouth hopes it'll never see Alan Grimson back on its streets.